Hello, this is R Rats with Team 4545 League, analyzing the game between Hugh Dundada and Plutonus. This was played in the tiebreak round of the Team 52 playoffs. The match score is 1-1. So let's see what happens. Okay. Interesting line. It's a good way to get out a book really quick in a lot of respects. There's an interesting line. I've used this as white a number of times in Blitz, and I'll show you. Well, actually, he didn't play the move I would play. Okay, bishop h4. Now, black may look at this and say, well, I want to win the bishop pair and play g5, and sometimes this is really played without thought, because if white does play bishop g3, it's true black gets the bishop pair, but then white's got this tremendous attack down the h-file, and black probably doesn't want to castle kingside, so I think sometimes this line is played in impulse without thought. But I have an interesting move to play against g5, and I'll show it to you. I've shown it before. Bears repeating. You may not see all my videos. Is f3, and black's kind of in a quandary here. If he moves the knight, he just drops the pawn on g5 for absolutely nothing. So he's pretty much going to have to take, and then white's got this nifty little pawn center, an open f-file. Black's got this funny pawn down on h4 that may get eventually surrounded and won. White can play knight f3 at some point and attack it. And what's going to guard it? Keep the queen on d8 to guard it? Well, maybe it'll go to h3, and white will just play g3 and eventually maybe surround that pawn and win it. But like I say, I've had this position a number of times in Blitz, and what I usually run into is something like c5, and then I play e3, and often I run into queen b6. Now the best move seems to be b3 here, and then maybe black will play bishop h6, hitting e3, in which case white's got a number of reasonable moves. Probably queen d3 is perfectly fine here, and you get a chess position unlike any you've ever seen, and it's you versus him, mano y mano, and all theories thrown out the window, and have a good game. So if you want to get out a book quick, this is a line to do it. But let's go back to the game, and white played bishop f4 and g6. Now here I believe white made a mistake. White should just probably play f3. f3 just seems to be like a fine move, because it's kicking the knight out. It's going to have to go back to one square or the other. Pick one, doesn't matter. And then white just plays e4. And look at that nice pawn center white has. I'm not saying black's without resources. The black player's going to have to sit and work on this and find a strategy. But I certainly like white right here. I imagine most people would. But anyway, that's for your homework. So g6. So white plays bishop e5, and I don't know, black could consider f6 here, but it's interesting what he does play, knight f6. Now we've actually reached the same position we could have had black played g6 on his second move. And when I reach this position as white, I do what white did and take. So we get this position a couple moves later. So white has succeeded the bishop pair, has succeeded in doubled black's pawns, and again we're pretty much out of theory here, striking out on our own. But white has free development. Of course black does too. White will be able to play knight f3, probably try to get e4 in at some point, and possibly c4, but it's not all that important. You can get the knight to c3 or d2 to support that, and it's a reasonable game. White's not going to hurt for development as long as he just focuses on that. So let's see what happens, and I'll make some comments as we go. But I don't think g3 is necessarily the right choice here. It's better, since you want to play e4, to bring the bishop out along the f1a6 diagonal, rather than stop and fianchetto it, because eventually you're going to want to play e4, and you've kind of just wasted a move here that you could have been getting your pieces out just a wee bit quicker. But it's not a disaster. It doesn't mean that black's going to get any kind of advantage here. The game is even either respect. I just have the feeling that it gives white a little bit more if he just focuses on moving his king pawn up, getting his knights out, and his bishop out and castled. And here c4, it's not a bad move. It's not the move I would play. I would be focused on getting my pieces out. And this seems to give black a decent move, which, let's see what he played. He castled, but there's nothing wrong with d5 right here. Strategically, it's fine. It opens up the diagonal for the bishop on c8. And if white takes, there's an immediate tempo on the rook, okay, and then black can play bishop g4, threatening to win a pawn. Okay, these are just sample lines. Now maybe white has to play bishop g2. Now we can open up a line on d4. White's got to be careful about dropping that. The threat is, well, not really, but a little preparation. Eventually we want to take here and then be able to take here, but we have to be careful about that diagonal. b7 is loose. But suddenly black's getting some pressure here, and look how the black pieces are coming out. But again, white has resources. It's his move. He can play knight c3, attacking the queen, and the queen can go to a5, and it's a game. White may have, or black may have to give back the bishop pair in a moment if h3, I don't know, bishop h5. But like I said, there's a lot of potential here for analysis, and it's up to the players of this position to go back and look at it and try to evaluate and improve their skill by analysis and judgment of those positions. So at any rate, black castles and misses his opportunity, and then white stops d5 once and for all. And now f5, a move that eventually black's going to play anyway. It opens up that diagonal. It puts some pressure on e4, so that if eventually white plays e4, black will be able to rid himself of his doubled pawn. Okay, e3. Again, I think this is a little slow. The two knights are still sitting back on their original squares. As I said, the e-pawn could have been up on e4, and the bishop could have been out on d3 by now, and still saved the pawn move on g3 and had a knight out to boot. But, at any rate, d6, and I guess white plays this because he wants to keep the pressure on b7, but black can neutralize that easily enough with c6 at some point, or even knight c6. Okay, so let's go forward. Knight d7. So development is about even. Black hasn't really gained a lot with white's fumbling around, not getting directly developed, but black's okay here. White's got just a wee bit more space. White knight attacks d5. It's hard to say where this knight is going. Well, he could go to f6 and e4, but it's not influencing e5 and c5. Okay, knight f6. And again, I think this is just a little too early. White's still not castled yet. You don't want to necessarily commit all your pawns until you get your development going. But see what happens. c6. Okay, to prepare to develop the bishop, and it secures b7. Okay, finally white castles. Now black supports e4 a little bit. Clearly he wants to get the knight in there and doesn't want to drop the pawn. And if the pawn exchanges on e4, the bishop on c8 has more squares on the diagonal under its control, so that's reasonable. Okay, queen d3 to keep the knight out of e4. This is fine. And queen e7 to support knight e4 once again. And then white goes about his business with planning to advance his queenside pawns. Clearly he's not set up to advance on the king side and start an attack, so he's playing for the queenside expansion. But this does have one minor drawback, as will become apparent in a minute. See, here's black, and I've talked so many times about leaving your queen rook and queen bishop at home. In effect, you're giving the odds of a rook and a bishop. So far black hasn't developed that bishop yet. keeping the rook out of play. But the way the position is opening up, the black rook is going to get developed by white because the A file is going to open up, and then suddenly that rook is developed. So that's one drawback with this strategy of white's, that by advancing on the queen side, he just enables the black rook to develop. Maybe it could have been better to try to redeploy the minor pieces somehow, take some times, maybe swing this rook over to c1 and coordinate the minor pieces and see if black doesn't go ahead and put his bishop, say, on e6 or d7, and then move the rook off the d file or off the a file, and then open it up, and black's not ready to have activity on that file. Just things to think about. Okay, so b5, and boom, black's got the open file, so his rook is now developed. d5, which takes a lot of the pressure off this long diagonal from the bishop, and then an exchange of pawns. Now, if we stop and evaluate this real quick, it looks like white is fine. Black's got a backward pawn on the open file, but it's difficult to see exactly how white's going to exploit that at this moment. Ideally, he's got this wonderful outpost of c5 for a knight, but you can't get the knight there, so you're not able to go to a4 as you would be in a lot of this type of position because the a file opened up. So white would have to do some maneuvering around to try to force that in, and then black's got time to stop and hunker down and find an adequate resource. If anything, once the knight goes to a4, black can sink the knight in on e4 and be countering that square. So for what it's worth, let's go ahead. Okay, rook b6. This looks reasonable. It prepares to double rooks on the open file, attacks a pawn, and black just finally completes his development on move 19. And then white continues naturally, and again, if you're white, you're probably optimistic here. Outside pass pawn, everything else. But the black position is not without resources, and black starts finding some good moves here. Knight e4. This is perfectly fine. Go ahead, take it. I'll take back with my f pawn and tempo your queen and have a better diagonal for my bishop, and I'll continue about my way. So how does white handle this? Well, he plays rook b7, and I'm not sure if this is the correct move. If anything, maybe this is a time to stop and play a4. And the reason I say a4 is you've got this pass pawn. Why not see how far you can get it up the board? And if you can get it up without black doing anything critical against you, suddenly that pass pawn becomes a pillar of strength. And since that's white's asset, maybe it's time to go ahead and run it. But he didn't. So rook b7 just seems to hand the initiative over to black, and black just calmly plays knight d6 and attacks the rook. Now the rook has to find a new square. It's driven out of the b7 post, so he comes back, and all of a sudden, boom, black finds this fine move, and all of a sudden there's threats. Bishop f5, x-ray attack on, and winning the rook on b1 for the bishop. But again, white has some resources. To begin with, he starts by collecting a pawn, and I was making a comment in this game about this time. I was watching for a while, and I thought that any moment now this game could get very critical, and black could just be having all kinds of fun. So at any rate, I'm going to have to run through this real quick. There's an exchange here, and I'm going to show the one critical point where black missed something fine. Okay, trading these off. Okay, here, if h4, then f6 seems to be a good move. So white found this move. Now, if black to play and do the best he can. Stop. Okay, resume the tape. Queen e7 seems to win. On this threatening mate, black has this beautiful defensive move, hitting the queen, guarding g7, and attacking the rook. It's not available on what he played, and he has to take the knight. The game is kind of leveling out to even here, and they made a few exchanges, and agreed to a draw right here. So I wish I had a little more time at the end, but the players can offer some insight. I want to thank you for your time, for stopping to look at this game. Both players played very well. And thanks again. See you soon.